Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Qizhi. Coming up in this edition, the Russian Foreign Minister and the US Secretary of State have met in Kuala Lumpur, exchanging views on bilateral relations and Ukraine. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has called on China, Japan, South Korea and ASEAN members to continue to advance regional integration while attending the ASEAN Plus 3 Foreign Ministers meeting. And the Brazilian president has vowed retaliation to US tariffs, but also kept diplomacy open. We begin with the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio have met in Kuala Lumpur. They exchanged views on bilateral ties, Ukraine and other international issues. The meeting comes as tensions rise over Moscow's increasing attacks on Ukraine and whether Russia is serious about a peace deal. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov says Moscow does not believe peace talks with Kyiv are deadlocked. US President Donald Trump says he will make a major statement on Russia on Monday, but did not elaborate on the details. Dasha Chinishova reports from Moscow.
Moscow has been calling on Kyiv to resume the negotiations and to hold the third round of talks, stressing that at this stage negotiations are in the interest of Kyiv because with every day passing, Ukraine, according to Moscow, is losing more ground and the situation on the ground is changing drastically, not in Kyiv's favor. We also understand that the situation in Ukraine was part of the discussion between Sergei Lavrov, Russian Foreign Minister, and the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, with two sides reaffirming their commitment to working together. But also Marco Rubio stressing strongly that they do disapprove in the United States the lack of progress on the negotiations. We've heard some interesting statements from Marco Rubio suggesting that there have been some new ideas discussed during those negotiations in Malaysia on the sidelines of the ASEAN summit, and those are not the ideas, according to Washington, that could be breaking through, but they still could be leading towards some sort of a path towards peace. So at this stage, we understand that the contact between Russia and the United States on issues of bilateral relationship and the situation in Ukraine will continue, but still Moscow is saying that in the absence of the progress on the diplomatic track, what Russia has left is to continue to achieve the goals of what it calls its special military operation in Ukraine by military means, even though the Kremlin stresses every time that the preferred means of finding the solution to this conflict and achieving the goals would be through negotiations.
That was Dasha Chinishova in Moscow. A Russian strike on Kyiv has killed at least 2 people and injured 20 others. Drones pounded the Ukrainian capital as Russian attacks continue to stretch Ukraine's air defenses to breaking point. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky pleaded for more aid from allies at the Ukraine Recovery Conference in Rome and urged more US interceptor missiles. Audrey McAlpine reports from Kyiv.
Well, the situation here has certainly become critical. We've seen mounting attacks over the last few weeks. Each week, a new record of drones being launched into Ukraine. For example, a new record high of some 728 drones. And while this attack was not as large as that, many here in Kyiv felt that it was, and that's because more Russian drones are getting through Ukraine's air defenses. You could hear, while there was a constant hum of these drones, it was also followed by the constant crashing of the sound of them reaching perhaps their targets. And this is because they're employing new methods. They're flying beyond the range of Ukraine's current air defenses. And so we heard that soundbite earlier from President Zelensky in Rome calling for interceptor drones. And this is something that was launched a few weeks ago by the head of the general staff, the head of Ukraine's armed forces, Alexander Syrsky. And this is to create a new units to roll out this new program for these interceptor drones. And this is really Ukraine's solution to combat these swarms of Russian Shahed drones that are coming into the country every night. A low-cost solution compared to things like Patriots, which run around $4 million per missile, against a Russian Shahed drone, which runs anywhere from 20 to 50,000. So, of course, as they send in hundreds of these, they have to find a low-cost solution that works. And so you see Zelensky calling for his allies to help him, to help Ukraine in funding this new development. Now, of course, for Ukrainians, you mentioned that Russia is putting pressure on Ukraine, and they interpret that as Russia hoping to continue the war. And so they feel that they really need these interceptor missiles to settle down, to hunker down for what could possibly become a protracted war.
That was Audrey McAlpine reporting from Kyiv. Elsewhere in Europe, the European Union says a trade agreement could be reached with the US in the coming days. The Trump administration extended the July 9th deadline to reach a deal to August 1st. Otherwise, baseline tariffs on European goods will increase from 10 to 50%. European industries remain unsure how they will be affected. William Denslow reports from Brussels.
European cars heading to the US have been subject to a 25% duty since April. And officials say this is one of the sectors negotiators are seeking concessions for. The EU calls tariffs a tax that hurt businesses and consumers on both sides of the Atlantic. But there are mounting fears that duties, in some form, could be here to stay. The European Commission says a provisional trade deal could be just days away, but big questions remain over what the arrangement might look like. Unlike over a dozen other trading partners, the US has not sent a letter to the European Union detailing a new tariff rate, with President Trump stating this week that he's been pleased with the EU during recent negotiations. But Washington describes the trading relationship as unfair, citing the roughly $58 billion trade surplus recorded last year. The EU and US share the world's largest bilateral trade relationship, and the European Commission maintains it's a partnership that's been mutually beneficial. An EU pause on its countermeasures worth roughly $25 billion is due to expire on Monday, and officials are tight-lipped on whether they could come into effect.
No decision has been taken on this yet, and we're in an hour-by-hour situation. So, if there's something to say, we will say it.
EU trade ministers are convening here in the Belgian capital Monday, amid hopes that a framework trade agreement will be in place by then. While there are hopes that a win-win deal will be achieved, officials maintain that all options remain on the table when it comes to defending Europe's interests.
That was William Denslow in Brussels. Turning to Asia, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has called on China, Japan, South Korea and ASEAN members to eliminate interference and continue to advance regional integration. He made the remarks during the ASEAN Plus 3 Foreign Ministers meeting in Kuala Lumpur. Wang Yi said development and cooperation are the focus of East Asian cooperation. He gave 4 suggestions for future cooperation, focusing on integrated development, building a resilient East Asia, being innovative and dynamic, and creating a culturally connected East Asia. The minister also said China is willing to inject new impetus into the common development of the region, no matter how the external environment changes. ASEAN foreign ministers hailed the ASEAN Plus 3 system, saying cooperation should continue to play a strategic role in promoting inclusive regional development and sustainable peace. Ryan Melzer has more on the Chinese foreign minister's latest agenda in the Malaysian capital.
Foreign Minister Wang Yi had a packed day starting with the ASEAN plus China meeting where he gave one of the addresses and he spoke about the deep collaboration between China and ASEAN and his hopes that that collaboration will only accelerate and deepen now. And then he held a series of bilateral talks with his counterparts, foreign ministers from Vietnam, Japan, Bangladesh, Malaysia, with Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, and with the foreign ministers of Thailand and Cambodia too. And I'm sure, like his ASEAN counterparts, he will have urged Cambodia and Thailand to try to seek a swift resolution to their border dispute, which has been disrupting trade and travel between the countries and harmony in the region. And then in the afternoon, he was part of the ASEAN plus 3, ASEAN plus China, Japan, South Korea meeting, where again he gave one of the addresses. And this grouping is basically the core of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the giant free trade deal that also encompasses Australasia as well. And in the face of this assault on the global trading system from the US, the tariff threats that are looming over every country in in ASEAN and East Asia, with the exception of Singapore, which is the only country that gets away with a 10% tariff. In the face of all those threats, it's very important, obviously, for ASEAN and the East Asian countries to use RCEP to deepen trade and investment and collaboration across a range of spheres. So very positive talk about looking forward to ways to do that and as a way to counter the impact of the tariffs from the US.
That was Ryan Melser in Kuala Lumpur. In the Americas, Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva says he hopes to resolve the US tariff dispute through diplomacy, but he vows to impose equal retaliatory measures if Trump's proposed 50% tariffs take effect on August 1st. Trump wants Brazilian authorities to drop their prosecution of former President Jair Bolsonaro of an alleged coup attempt. Lula says they will form a committee with business leaders to rethink their trade policy with the U.S. Francis Kaur has more from Washington, D.C.
Another tariff tiff, this time between the U.S. and Brazil. One day after President Donald Trump said the U.S. would slap a 50% tariff on all Brazilian imports starting August 1st, Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva is swinging back, announcing any tariff hikes would be met with reciprocal levies. The United States is Brazil's second largest trading partner after China. In a social media post, Lula stated, "The claim regarding a U.S. trade deficit in its commercial relationship with Brazil is inaccurate. Statistics from the U.S. government itself show a surplus of $410 billion in the trade of goods and services with Brazil over the past 15 years. Brazil is a sovereign nation with independent institutions and will not accept any form of tutelage." Lula's stinging critique of Trump's interference coming days after a similar rebuke at the BRICS summit.
So we don't want an emperor. Our countries are sovereign. If Trump issues tariffs, other countries have the right to do the same.
In the
face of the US government's indecent action in imposing a 50% tax on Brazilian exports, we're already taking proactive measures. I called the main representative entities of the most affected sectors, the orange juice sector, the beef sector and the coffee sector, so that together we can expand the actions we've been taking during President Lula's 2.5 years in government.
Trump's triggers for the tariffs, the current trial of former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro on charges of plotting a coup to stop Lula from taking office in 2023, and what he sees as a trade relationship tipped to Brazil's favor. Experts say Trump's moves set a dangerous precedent.
President Trump's letter justifying this new tariff makes reference to the country's legal, political, and ideological issues, so it constitutes interference in the country's internal affairs, using a trade relationship as an excuse and based on premises that are not necessarily true.
U.S. government data shows the U.S. had a goods trade surplus with Brazil of nearly $7.5 billion last year, a robust trade relationship with Brazil importing U.S. mineral fuels, aircraft, and machinery, and the U.S. importing gas, petroleum, coffee, and iron from Brazil. A long-standing economic partnership now threatening to crack.
That was Francis Kaur in Washington. Finally, in the U.S., the search for the missing people in the devastating floods that killed at least 120 people in Texas continues. Over 170 people are reported missing. It is Tianshan visited Hunt, one of the counties hit hard by the floods, to find out more.
This is one of the hardest hit locations from the historic floods that hit Texas last week, and the search and rescue operations are still going on. A lot of the debris that they've already combed through, some of the red crosses signifying that there were no more bodies to be found there. The levee that some of these riverfront homes had in order to protect themselves from the occasional river surges, the flooding that is very common to this area. But with what happened in the last week's disaster, essentially the river's level not only exceeded the levee, but went 3 times higher, and some of the homes, in the case of this one specifically, they actually found an industrial-sized cooler in the size of a room that was staying outside that entered the house through the roof, causing complete destruction. Just tells you the sheer force, the magnitude of these floods. And of course, that makes it all the more difficult to really find more bodies in the area, because the amount of debris and the sizes of these debris are so high.
That was Edith Tianshan in Texas. Now, recapping the headlines before we go. The Russian Foreign Minister and the US Secretary of State have met in Kuala Lumpur, exchanging views on bilateral ties and Ukraine. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has called on China, Japan, South Korea and ASEAN members to continue to advance regional integration while attending the ASEAN Plus 3 Foreign Ministers meeting. And the Brazilian president has vowed retaliation to US tariffs, but also kept diplomacy open. And that's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports and culture, you can subscribe to The Beijing Hour, a 1-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Qi Zhi. Thank you for listening.